Hello, and welcome to Origins, where we explore the unique childhoods of leading figures in science, technology, engineering, arts, and mathematics, also known as STEAM. Today, I will be a conversation partner with our guest, Dr. Carlotta Berry. Dr. Berry is the Lawrence J. Giacoletto Endowed Chair of Electrical and Computer Engineering at the Rose-Hulman Institute of Technology. Dr. Berry is passionate about increasing the diversity in engineering in order to solve the unique problems of the world. She is the co founder of multiple programs: the Rose Building Undergraduate Diversity Program, the Black in Engineering Program, and the Black in Robotics Program. Her research interests are in robotics education, interface design, and human robot interactions. Dr. Berry is also a talented author with a wide range of interests. She wrote a textbook called The Mobile Robotics for Multidisciplinary Study, and she is also in the process of writing a novel. Dr. Berry lives in Indiana with her husband and daughter. We welcome Dr. Berry to Origins today, and we invite her to share with us the touch points of her childhood that has led her to where she is in her career today. Well, welcome, Dr. Berry, to Origins. And here at Origins, we like to get started in childhood and just find out kind of the touch points in your life that led you to where you are today and that kind of inspired you to follow the path into engineering and robotics. So please feel free to tell us about your childhood.
So absolutely, it was very non-traditional. Sometimes when I talk to my coworkers who are also engineers about their beginnings, it's extremely different from mine. A lot of them had moms or dads who were in STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math. They may have worked in garages with their parents, worked on cars, put TVs together, took TVs apart, whatever. But mine, I like to say someday I'm going to write my autobiography and it's going to be called From Barbies to Bots: My Unexpected Journey to STEM, because I did not start off with any of that. My mom was a kindergarten teacher for 30 years. Her mom was a piano teacher for 30 years. So there's no one in my life who was an engineer or a scientist. And so my beginning was my Barbies. It was my dolls. And I think, like I share with a lot of people, that the foundations for engineering are really just having a creative spirit and being able to put things together, take things apart, figure out how they work. So for me, that was my dolls. So a lot of my innovation came in the ways of, I need to make clothes for my Barbie, I need to make a house for my Barbie, and things like that. So the STEM probably came later, maybe around middle school, fifth or sixth grade. I always loved math and science. And I had done a science project, and I had done one on electricity, basically a battery and a light bulb and how you turn that on. And that was probably the beginning of my electrical engineering journey. But then I had a principal tell my mom that I feel like she's wasting her abilities here, and you should really look at putting her in a magnet school. I'm from Nashville, Tennessee, and at the time they had started public magnet school. So there was no fee, you just had to pay to go there. And so my mom took me out of my junior high and put me in a magnet school. And so it was there that probably started my STEM journey, because I got recruited to be in a program called Inroads. And Inroads is a program to get kids from under resourced communities prepared to do like internships in business, science, engineering, etc. And I had a career counselor tell me I really should consider engineering, because up until that point, I was going to be a high school math teacher, because I was going to be a teacher like my mom, because I love teaching. And I was like, I don't know what an engineer is, and I don't even know if I would like to be an engineer. So obviously, I'm a little older, so there were no cell phones, internet was not a big thing. So I walked to the library after school and just looked up what is an engineer. And I read about it because, it wasn't the train conductor that I thought it was. And I was just like, looks okay. I'm just not sure. So that's why I actually have two bachelor's degrees, one from Spelman College and one from Georgia Tech, because I wanted to get my math and my electrical engineering degree. So just in case the engineering thing didn't work out, I still had my math degree to fall back on to become a high school teacher.
Oh, that's so interesting, especially the starting with Barbies
Yeah,
and just starting in this place of, well, I just need to make something for my Barbie. And then
absolutely.
having that recognition then that, you had very strong
Yeah.
math and science skills. And so it sounds like your math and science classes were really easy for you. Were there other classes that you found to be easy, maybe because of some of your other background, maybe from your parents?
I will say that they weren't necessarily always easy. They were interesting.
Mhm.
Um, Probably not so much. Like, I know you were saying, what about other classes? Considering I write books now, I probably should say English. But at the time, no, not really. I just think I liked classes where I could kind of see why we were doing it, what's the beginning, what's the end, and how I get there. But one of the other things I will tell when parents ask me, how do I get my kid interested and excited about STEM? Math and science are extremely important. But I also say, even if it doesn't come easy to you necessarily, but it's something that you're interested in, that means you're going to be willing to work hard to get it, even when it doesn't come easy. That may be the area for you. Same with innovation and creativity. If it's something you like to do, even if it's a little hard and you hit some roadblocks, but you're like, oh, no, I'm going to stay up all night and get this thing, then that sounds like STEM may be a place for you as well. Other classes, not so much. I would tell you what I hated though: PE, honey. I am a traditional engineer to the core. I am so non-sports, non-athletic, all of that. No. Even in college, I had to take a PE class and it was jazz dance. And I got a D in it because I couldn't learn the routine. So that was the stuff I hated. But as far as other things, other than math and science, I don't know if anything else really got me really excited. Although I did like some of the extracurricular activities that were related to like artistic things, which really makes sense. The engineering, like, crocheting, cross stitching, knitting, things like that. And I think because also that's still creativity and innovation. And I think it
Mhm.
all kind of, it marries together because, a lot of times now people talk about marrying the arts with STEM to make STEAM.
Mhm.
So I
Yeah.
just think it ties together nicely.
Oh, that's great. So you also mentioned that you weren't sure if you were interested in engineering. It's really funny because when I was trying to hone down what I wanted to do, I also went to the library and looked it up in the encyclopedia.
Yep.
But so when you first encountered engineering, I guess what was that first encounter with engineering, and what I guess made you start to fall in love with it?
So interestingly enough, when I got to Georgia Tech, and unfortunately it's still this way even today, there are not a lot of women in engineering. There are not a lot of Black people in engineering. And that's with respect to in your classes as well as your professors. So the majority of my professors were white men. And in a class, you may only be one of two or three Black people, one of two or three women. And although I found the topic interesting, I did not find the way that it was being taught interesting, or the
Mm,
dynamics of how I interacted with my professors or my
mhm,
classmates that interesting. So I was falling in love with a topic, but at the same time, it was becoming a love hate relationship with the way that engineering is particularly marketed, sold, who people think can be engineers, how
mm.
that's projected, and how those stereotypes sometimes translate into your experiences. And what I mean is, even to this day, I still have some of my students who will tell me they experience the same thing. So, my area is controls and robotics. So, the
Mm,
classes that I liked the most were the classes that had a lot of obviously math in them because I had a love for math as well, but classes where I could see how I could design something to do something and see it achieve that, such as making a robot follow a wall or track a ball or whatever. So it was a little bit of those two dynamics. And even in the midst of all of that, even though I was sometimes struggling and not doing that well, I'm in my mind, I'm going, I could teach this stuff better than they do. I could make this look way more interesting than they do. And so
mhm,
that was the beginning of my journey. And I love engineering, but I don't love the way they're showing me engineering. So it became a marrying of those two things together to create my current career, which is an engineering professor. Because I do want my students to say, "Hey, you don't act like my other professors." Well, good. I don't mean to, right? So I think that was the love of it. It's being able to touch something and make it better or create something that you did not ever see exist before.
mhm.
And so doing that starts the beginning of your love for it, but also your love for it makes you feel comfortable criticizing it and thinking about how to make it better.
Oh, that yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Um, it's as you were kind of struggling with this kind of love hate relationship with your field, and especially with being kind of underrepresented in the field, were you able to find support systems, mentors, or anyone that you could look up to kind of get through that process?
I did. It was interesting. So at Spelman, it was natural. It's a
Hmm.
small liberal arts college with about 2,000 students. I was in a living and learning honors program. So we were all in a dorm together. We all went to class together. Our professors were really invested in our success. So it was really easy to immediately find your community, immediately find a study group. All of those things just came naturally to you because we had a curfew as well. So when you were in the dorm in the middle of the night, when you couldn't go anywhere, it was really easy to walk down the hall and say, "Hey, can we do our calculus homework together?" When I got
Right.
to Georgia Tech, it was a little bit more difficult. There weren't a lot of students who looked like me. So one of the first things you have to recognize, and I tell my students this as well, is finding your community and understanding that sometimes peer mentoring, cross racial, cross gender, cross age, right? Mentors may be your community. And so finding the students who not only I was comfortable enough to approach and study with, but students who were able to explain things on a level I can understand. I often will tell my students sometimes trying to study with the 4.0 and the A student is not your best bet because sometimes those students just get it. You want to find someone who maybe is an A B student who remembers what it was like to struggle and not understand the material because it'll be easier for them to explain it to you than some kid who barely takes the book home and plays video games all night, wakes up, goes to class, and get an A on the test. So yes, absolutely. But for different seasons and phases of my life, I needed different mentors. And probably my biggest challenge came when it was time for me to try to get my master's and PhD, finding mentors who look like me. I had found one, it was a Black guy when I got my master's, and he had a PhD in engineering. He was the first time I had ever met a Black person with a PhD in engineering. And he ended up writing one of my recommendation letters to college. And then when I decided I wanted to be a professor, finding Black women engineering professors, right? Now I know a lot of them, but at the time I didn't know any. And there are some challenges and struggles that you face in academia, especially when you're one of only a few. You're a unicorn, as they say. It would be really great to find someone who has gone through what you've gone through, who you can talk to and relate to. And I think that's why I do what I do to help increase in Black in engineering and Black in robotics, to increase visibility in those fields so that those coming behind us don't have to work nearly as hard as we did to find someone to go, "Oh, you're going to be okay. And no, it's not right, although it happens, but let me give you some advice on how to get through those things."
Very interesting. Yes. I'm very glad that you were able to find that support
Yeah.
system in various different ways because it definitely is, it's kind of a, I don't know, you are trying to kind of pull your tribe together. It's not, it
Yeah.
doesn't necessarily come ready made for you at that time. So, um, I guess the question I have, you did your undergraduate and then you went straight to do your master's and then to PhD, or did you do any work in between?
No. So one of the things that happened at Georgia Tech is not only did I struggle a bit, but I also, my grades were not the best. Because I was in a 3-2 program, which means it takes 5 years to get your degree. I started running out of money after my fourth year. Sorry, because at the time, they weren't really sure how to do financial aid for people who don't get their degrees in 5 years, even though that was the program I was in. So because of that, I had to work multiple jobs. And in the time of doing that, my schoolwork started to suffer. So although while at Georgia Tech, I really wanted to get my graduate and my PhD and become an engineering professor, I knew that my grades were not going to get me anywhere near where I needed to be for graduate school. Not to mention, like I said at the time, I didn't really have any mentors. I didn't have a clue who would write me a recommendation letter to grad school. So after I graduated, I moved to Michigan from Atlanta to work for Ford Motor Company and then Detroit Edison, which is an electric utility company, as a controls engineer. And I did that for about 2 years, not only because, I needed to get the experience, but I also needed to pay off my student loans, which were out of control. Probably nothing compared to young people now, but at the time, a pretty good amount. And while I was at Ford, I was in something called the National Society of Black Engineers, Detroit Alumni Extension. So part of my community is joining organizations like NSBE, Society of Women Engineers, and things like that. And there was a professor at Wayne State who had gotten a grant to support a student to get their master's degree, but it had to be a student of color. And it was in controls, which was the area that I was most excited about. And I got it. So just luckily, even looking at my credentials, my and my grades and all of that, I was blessed enough to get that fellowship. And about a year in, I was working full time and going to school full time, and I was falling asleep in class. I was exhausted because I worked in a plant. So I could
Mhm.
work in the middle of the night, I worked during the day. And what I did in the plant is, as a process controls engineer, I had to program the robots, make sure the robots were running, make sure that the line was running. It was a windshield plant. And because, when the line is down, that's money, they could call you in the middle of the night and be like, we need you to come to work and get the robot up.
Mhm.
So I had to take a leave from my job because I was like, I'm never going to get my master's degree like this. I'm exhausted. And so I took a leave. I got my master's. And then before I returned to Ford, Detroit Edison approached me about another job opportunity. I knew I wanted my PhD, but I was like, okay, fine. About a year into that job, I was like, enough. If I keep putting it off, I'm not going to go. I'm having the same conversation with one of my students right now. He's debating whether he should go straight to his PhD or go work. I told him, you do what's best for you. But remember, once you get in the good life of making money and not having to live like a broke student and study all the time, it's really hard to transition back. So that's why a year into my job at Detroit Edison, I quit and went to Vanderbilt because I knew if I put it off much longer, I wasn't going to do it. Because going back to living like a broke college student is not ideal, but those are the sacrifices you make to do something that you know is important. And I think it was more important for me to be an engineering professor, something you don't see a lot of, as opposed to an engineer, which you would see.
Very great. It's yeah, it is very interesting to have to make that transition from working, going back to
Yeah.
school. I did the same thing. So could you tell us just a little bit about the experiences that you did have working and maybe how they translated or didn't translate into your graduate school experience?
So I think one of the most interesting things is to recognize that sometimes what you learn in school may or may not completely translate in what you do. So when I first got to Ford, one of the first things they told me is, I tell my students this as well, engineering teaches you how to learn, especially your 4 years of college, but knowing that there's some things, because students are like, oh, I don't like humanities class. I hate the English classes. I don't like the history and the social studies. And I was like, sometimes those things are teaching you about ethics, teaching you about things that you should not do as an engineer. So take every learning opportunity, even if you don't currently see why it's important. So when I first got to Ford, one of the most interesting things is that they told me there are some things you need to know that you didn't learn in college. So we're going to send you back to school.
Mhm.
So within my first month of that job, I had to then go back and have an immersive course into mechanical engineering concepts that I didn't know anything about. This is why I also share that multidisciplinary experiences are important, which is why I work with some colleagues at my current university to start the multidisciplinary minor in robotics. So that if you're like, I want to study robotics, and I'm like, okay, well, as a controls engineer, I look at the controls parts of robotics, but that doesn't mean I should not also know something about software or how you program a robot or mechanics or gears or motors or things like that as well, because all of those things have to work together as a system. So one of the things that I feel that working helps you with is to see the holistic view of how what you've prepared for has to connect with everything else. I tell my students it's very rare you're going to get a job where they're going to put you in a cubicle somewhere and say you only talk to other electrical engineers all day. That's not going to happen. And since the electrical engineer may know more about power, when that mechanical engineer comes to you and goes, hey, I got this really cool design, you could tell them, okay, that's never going to work because of this thing they may not know. So, one of the most important things that I think I learned when I did work in industry, and I also did it as an intern when I was in college, is how to connect what you can do with the skills of other people in order to create the whole system.
Excellent. Yes, those multidisciplinary skills
Yes.
are amazing for any career track. But you're right, especially once you get into the kind of industry world because it is vastly different oftentimes than what
Mhm.
you did in school. It's definitely not as focused in that sense. So yeah, the more understanding you have of the holistic process it makes you so much more valuable. So before we kind of move into your graduate school and go towards your current career, could you just maybe, for those in the audience that don't know, just give maybe a brief overview of what electrical engineering and what robotics is?
Absolutely. And so that's a great question because we have students who actually enroll in college and pick a major and have no idea what it is. So in general, what an engineer is a person that uses math and science in order to improve things and a process. So there's lots of sub-disciplines of engineering, and the one that you select tells what you want to do. So example, I'm an electrical engineer. And even under electrical engineering, there are concentrations. So there's a power electronics concentration, which would be people who look at the ways that you deliver and efficiently use power or use alternative energy. My subdiscipline is controls. So as a controls engineer, what I do is I design processes and things to make them work more efficiently or effectively. And then under controls, I'm actually a robotics engineer. And what a robot is basically a machine that is given intelligence with software in order to achieve some task. For example, I wanted to design a robot that is a bomb disposal robot. So I would design one that works with police officers so that it can safely go and be deployed to dispose a bomb in order to keep people safe, right? Or you could have the Roomba, which everyone is most familiar with, which is the vacuum cleaning robot. That's the one that drives around and vacuums your house by randomly, going around a certain space. I do mobile robotics and I do human robot interaction. That subdiscipline looks at how do you design robots that people can effectively use in order to achieve some task. Um, Mine are mobile robots, but some people do humanoid robots. Those are the kind of robots that have the faces and have a physical embodiment. And you might see some of those type robots, like a museum tour guide, or it's a virtual receptionist or something like that. But basically, what robotics are is basically machines that are giving some kind of sensors to be able to interact with the world in order to achieve some mission or task.
Oh, excellent explanation. So, what got you interested specifically in I guess, the subfield of human robot interactions?
So I did have a class in robotics when I was at Georgia Tech, and I like to say everybody gets excited about a robot, even if you're not a STEM person. And so that was my beginning. I really loved that course, but part of my disappointment in that course was that because the robots were so expensive, only the professors and graduate students could touch them. The undergraduate students could design software or do a project on them, but then it would be deployed on the robot. We had to stand behind this glass shield and watch to see if it worked or not. And I was like, boo, this is not fun. So I had always said when I became an engineering professor, I wanted to design robotics, and I call it robotics for the streets now, but robots that any person could interact with to get anyone excited about math, engineering, and science. So having robots that people can engage with in a natural way in order to get them excited about the things that they're interested in. So that's why I do research in educational robotics or human robot interaction interfaces, designing ways for people to naturally interface with a mobile robot in order to give it a mission and so for it to achieve some kind of task. But that's why my area of robotics is kind of people centered, like my whole teaching mission, because
Mm.
you don't want it to be some foreign, inanimate object that people are like, oh, I can't touch that. I've done workshops for Girl Scouts and for girls who walked in the room and said, I don't want to do this because I'm scared of robots and I think it's going to hurt me. And that means I have a job to do, because if you're thinking like that, then there's a learning opportunity here that you're missing out on, because this is such a foreign thing to you that you can't even see yourself doing it. And so by the end of that day, I had that young lady programming a robot to do something, and that's achieving my purpose. I think that's why I do so much marketing on social media in particular, because I want people to be able to see themselves in this field and see themselves doing what I'm doing. That's how we get more women and people of color engaging in it.
So, what are some of the challenges that you face with respect to robot human interaction? So, both, I guess, on the technical side, but also maybe, I guess, on the human side, in terms of, are there just weird kind of interactions that can occur? that you have to maybe just
Mhm.
find out as you study?
Yeah, there's actually a word for that. It's called emergent behavior. So when you're doing robotics research, if you are designing software to work in a certain way, and then when you observe it, and it's like, I don't know why it's doing that, and you can't figure out why. Those are called emergent behavior. So a robot behavior is something that you program it to do, like I said, follow a wall or track a ball or vacuum a floor or clean your swimming pool, and then all of a sudden the robot starts doing something really odd, like, maybe splashing water on the side, or whatever it is. So yes, those things are going to happen, and sometimes they're interesting and fun, and sometimes they can be frustrating. So I think probably one of the most frustrating parts is when you think you have totally planned out what you want this system to do, and it just doesn't happen. Moving away from the technical aspects, I think one of the more frustrating parts is the fact that there's such a marketing problem, that there are some people who would have probably made great roboticists and engineers who were run away or turned away because someone told them that they did not fit the mold. I cannot
Mhm.
tell you the number of adults I have encountered or met who said that I wish I had had you as a professor, or I wish
Mhm.
I had known you sooner, because I was talked out of this field because of the gatekeeper in my calculus course, or because I had no one who looked like you, and I had professors who told me I wasn't meant to be in that space. I also had someone who told me that as well. I just ignored him. But so one of the other challenges is getting people to break their that have a paradigm shift, or break the stigma of, if you're not MacGyver or Dilbert, or if you weren't naturally born,
Mhm.
putting together cars at 3, then you're not meant to be an engineer. And so I think that's also just as big of a challenge. And when that one happens, that's where you start to see bias in technology, bias in STEM, bias in artificial intelligence, because you have a room full of white guys who are doing all of this work. Then they deploy something, and then, like the one that happened on Twitter, you're like, why are these highly pixelated images all being turned into white male faces? Because the technology was only checked on white males. So that's also a technical issue. Not having diverse, multidisciplinary voices in the room also affects the quality of the technologies that you can create.
Interesting. So, can you tell us some ways in which you have been able to, through your either through your research or your teaching, to break down some of these walls and these stigmas, and
I
also,
think, yeah,
yeah. Mhm.
a big one, for me at my level, I do presentations on them for people. Education and amplification are really big, because sometimes people just don't even realize or recognize things they can't see. The analogy, like the tortoise on the side of the pond, asking the fish how's the water, and the fish is like, what water? If the fish has never been out of the water, they don't know. So a big one is talking to my students and audiences about things like coded bias. Documentary was really big a couple of years ago, which looked at faulty facial recognition systems, where some of them did not recognize black faces at all. And Joy Bulamawini had to use a white mask. But now this education and amplification hopefully educated police departments that had started using the same technology in order to track people committing crimes. And 2 black men got arrested because it falsely basically attributed a crime to them based upon matching video cameras from the scene to their driver's license photos. So a big way that we can all educate people about the bias in technology that now leads to injustice, somebody being arrested,
Mhm.
is we have to amplify that. So it's kind of like, if you don't talk about it, and if you're not speaking about these things, people don't know them, they don't recognize them, and then they cannot correct it to make it better. So doing that with my students. Another big one is teaching controls and robotics to my students. Most of the pictures in their textbooks are going to look like white men. So going out of your way to find publications by people of color. In my robotics class, I named the robots after roboticists, some women, some black people, etc. And I have my students then go research who these people are.
Okay.
Because if not, then they would only hear about the top 4 or 5, which are mostly white men. But developing this appreciation for diverse voices hopefully will carry them into their future career, so that when they're in a room, they will make those kinds of considerations of have we tested this on a big enough population? Have we
Mhm.
made sure that the user testing didn't have all of just one demographic? And so I always say it's not just diversity in race and gender, but also ability. Is this bias against people who have disabilities? Things like that. What about people who may think a little differently? So these are the kind of things that sometimes, if you've not had to experience them, you have to have those conversations about them.
Yes, that's very true. So I guess maybe drilling down a little bit with respect to the biases and how, how people can get involved. I know, for example, with ChatGPT, they have people who work doing kind of supervised learning tasks and looking at the responses of ChatGPT and making sure that it's correct or accurate or things like that. And I assume that they're not always an engineer or something. They might have some other background. So, are those ways that people can also get involved with kind of this human robot interaction or human AI interaction and kind of
Yes,
help
they
with?
are. And also pointing out the major errors, because I don't know if you saw this as well, but ChatGPT was shown to be sexist, misogynistic as well. There were some questions that someone had asked it about a lawyer and someone being pregnant and being late for a meeting. And no matter how you asked the question, ChatGPT kept assuming the lawyer was a man. Even when the responses no longer made sense, they said, well, that can't compute because the lawyer is male. Nowhere in the question had it told them that the lawyer was a male, but it just assumed that the lawyer was a male and the secretary had to be a woman.
Mhm,
So we know garbage in is garbage out,
mhm,
and that the chat GPT was trained on basically things that are on the web and on the internet. So yes, we have to bring a diverse voice and be in those spaces to help correct some of those things. There's also another example of a chat bot. I want to say it may have been on Google that they had put up for people put up, and it was also farming like the internet in order to answer questions. And within 2 days, they had to take it down because it had become bigoted and racist and misogynistic as well. So, when you're training these systems and they're being trained on real data that's available on the web, and real people are out there who are like that, that sometimes these technologies are then going to take on some of those characteristics. So, in order to correct some of that, you have to have more people like us in those spaces going, this thing is being a little sexist. We need to get this fixed, right? Or it's being trained on some really bad data, and we don't want that going live. So, absolutely, being a voice in the wilderness to speak to some of those things, being in those spaces to work on correcting them, yes, is extremely important.
Are there ways in which the robotics community is also reaching out to some of the folks that are doing some of the supervised learning? Because I did hear something, and maybe it's true. I mean, I should check the accuracy of this, but I did hear that some of the people who are working on supervised learning were actually having some mental health issues because of some of the information that they had to filter out because it was either really explicit or whatever, and it was causing them issues. And so, if you have people get in these spaces and it affects them, on a personal level, are there ways in which the robotics community is reaching out to them to help them through that?
I don't know about that situation in particular, but I do know that Black in robotics, Black in AI, Black in engineering, Black women in AI, and the Algorithmic Justice League do work with researchers and have created things like a manifesto, as well as a call to action for things Black in computing as well, about things that they think are appropriate and inappropriate ways to use technology or deploy technology in ways for it to be used. So they do interact with some organizations. For example, Black in Robotics now has companies like Google who like to partner with them. And one of their requirements is you have to talk to me about how you as a company are doing a diversity plan for your engineers that is more than just performative. In other words, it needs to be substantive, where you explain to me how, if we do come work in those spaces to help kind of address some of these concerns, we are going to be included in a quantitative, qualitative, a substantive way, and that it's going to be a welcoming environment. In other words, since 2020 and what happened with George Floyd, the Black and X movement was born, and a lot of companies in 2020 made a lot of statements. But here now, 2 and 3 years later, we're finding that a lot of that was performative allyship and not really qualitative changes or substantive changes were being made. So I know the Algorithmic Justice League, which is a community of roboticists, who said that they are making a commitment that they would not let their research and technologies be used for any organizations that are going to be used them to bias against Black people. So they make commitments to not use them maybe for the military or for police officers. So there are organizations that do reach out to us, and we do have a commitment to work with them as long as they understand and they will abide by the standards to be able to do that in a way so that it will not be biased against our communities. I know that in New York, there was people who spoke out when the police dogs were used a couple of years ago to basically patrol tenements with the officers, because people were like, not only do we not want police bias against us, but we don't want to have police dogs being used to patrol us. And then so they removed them from the force, and just recently Mayor Adams brought them back. So once again, I think we have to be able to speak to voices that even if they don't work with us, that you do highlight some of those things that you have a concern with and why you have a concern, to make sure that your intellectual property and your the products of your labors are not being used in a way that you wouldn't be comfortable with.
So, excuse me, sorry. So, when you're working in this space and you're talking to companies about diversity within the workforce and kind of, providing these standards, I guess, what are some of the challenges you face? And also, I guess if you can tell our audience, because sometimes people might have some misconceptions about diversity and what the goals are in terms of diversifying the workforce. It's like, are we just doing this for the sake of doing it? Or is there really a purpose behind it? So could you just kind of speak to that a little bit?
So yeah, I think that's what I was saying about what Black in Robotics is trying to do, where they're requiring these companies to be very intentional and clear about how you plan to use these people if you are hiring them. One of the ways you can do this to make sure that they have a community of support is you can do things like cluster hiring. This is something we've discussed not only just for companies, but also for academia, right? So like, I'm the only Black woman professor on my campus. So one way for you to make sure that people are being supported in ways that are authentic is you cluster hire, so that there is a community of support, right? You get a critical mass of people of color there. And then you could talk about ways to support them, like giving them a dedicated mentor or someone that can talk to them about things that maybe they don't feel comfortable talking about at that university. So maybe someone at another university, like I said, building that network of support for them. So making more than bean counting means talking about making commitments to things such as how many entry level engineers, but how many people do you have in administration, or how many people do you have who are managers or directors or CEOs or CFOs or things like that, and making commitments to do that. And so understanding that you're not just bringing someone in to check a box, but you're bringing someone in to help develop them professionally. So do they feel supported? Do they feel developed, and that you actually value them as an employee, as opposed to just saying, okay, we actually have hired a Black engineer. Now our work here is done. Is that person happy? Do they feel like they're being mentored and supported and developed? And so I think that takes a continuous conversation to look at how people are doing that and if they're doing those things.
Interesting. Thank you. I wanted to kind of go back a little bit in order to answer this question. But so you mentioned that when you were in college, that the way that engineering was presented to you wasn't very attractive. So you loved the topic, but it wasn't attractive to you because of the kind of just the presentation and who was presenting it. So could you kind of tell us a little bit, maybe give us a little bit of an idea of what it would be like to be in a class that's being taught by you?
Oh, thank you. That's so sweet. So I'm gonna start out by telling you what it was like and what I didn't like, and then I'll kind of tell you the difference. So some of the challenges is the type of school. So I went to Georgia Tech. Georgia Tech is like, they call it an engineering factory, an engineer factory. So when you're at a research one school, so there are tiers of universities like research one, research two, and those values are set by how many PhDs you graduate, how many grant dollars the school brings in, how many research dollars, how many undergraduates, and things like that. So professors who are at an R1 or R2 school, that school's mission is to produce graduates, to produce PhDs, produce masters, publish papers in tier one journals, like the top of the line journals. So the challenge with that is people will focus on how they're assessed. So at those schools, those professors get promotion, tenure, retain, become deans, department heads, chairs, things like that, about how much they produce. Promotion and tenure is based upon research, teaching, and service. At schools like that, what they care most about is research, number of PhDs, how much money you're bringing in, and how many papers you're publishing. I know all this now. When I was a student at Georgia Tech undergrad, I didn't know this. And so because of that, the last thing on those professors' mind is their undergraduate students. So in those classes, I couldn't go to a professor's office for office hours. First of all, you could never find them. If you did find them, they were like, I don't really have time for you. I need you to go talk to the teaching assistant or one of my grad students. So I did not like feeling like a number, being in a class with 200 students where my professor didn't know my name, didn't know if I came to class or didn't come to class, could care less if I was failing or not. And even if I went to talk to them, they were not warm, friendly, approachable, kind, supportive, or whatever. I mean, I'm going through some things. They didn't care. So that's what I did not like. But I also did not realize it's because they're trying to please two masters, and the master of promotion, tenure, retention, and grant dollars was way more than what this little lowly brown girl in the undergraduate class cared about. So finding my community was finding what grad students were TAs and could help me, and what classmates could help me. So in my class, I teach at a different type of school because I did not want to ever have to make a choice between helping a student and focusing on my lab. Because I had a professor tell me that, like, I have to go to my lab and take care of my grad students. I need you to go see someone else. I never wanted to be that person. So even though I have a lab now, my undergraduate students work in my lab. My undergraduate students in my lab, that is another teaching opportunity for me. I'm never going to turn a student away who tells me they need help because I got to run down the hall and focus on the students who are going to be my bread and butter. They're all my bread and butter. So in my class, I know all my students' names. This is another big one. I talk to my students, not just about the class content, but, oh, look, you got a haircut. Looks good. What'd you do this weekend? Being able to let them see the human side of engineering. I had professors when I was an undergrad who literally looked at their feet when they talked to you. Like, hello, I'm up here, right? So caring more about the person than about the thing, I think is a big part of my journey. So if you come to me and tell me, I really hate this, I don't think I want to be an engineer anymore. Okay, let's talk about what you do want to do. I had there's not a lot of Black students at my school, and there's not a lot of Black women in particular. And I had one come to me and she said, I'm really not happy here. And I want to go to Spelman. And I'm wondering if you would write me a recommendation letter. It broke my heart to lose her. But then she was going to my alma mater. How could I say no? She was on a full ride, had a full scholarship, smart as a whip, and she did not want to be there. So I sucked it up and I wrote her recommendation letter. And when she graduated from Spelman, she was a member of the I don't know if she was her class president or vice president. She sent me an invitation and she thrived. So somebody who was miserable at my school, she went somewhere else where she completely thrived and was extremely happy when she graduated. And I said, that's what I'm here to do. So everyone I produce will not be an engineer, but I haven't done my job if I have not helped develop that person who they're meant to be. And that's what I did not get as an undergraduate. I got, if you can't do this and you can't cut it, then maybe you need to just go home. It's supposed to go in, what's going on with you? You haven't been coming to class lately. You're falling asleep in class. It seems like you're struggling. What's going on with you? I will say, I can't, I won't get them all. I won't get all the wins now. Some people do fail my class. Some people do change majors. But like I say, help me help you. You show me that you're trying to get there, I will meet you and help you go the rest of the way. Like I always say, one of my favorite stories is the young man. He was a Black man. He came to me. He said, I'm failing your class. What can we do? How can we get me over the line? I said, baby, you're not getting over that line. You're taking this class over. There's no hope for you. And he's a working engineer now. And he came back to me and he said, I was so mad at you. I was so mad at you when you failed me in that class. But I took it over. I graduated. I'm doing great. And you were one of my favorite professors. And that made, Me telling you you have to take a class over does not mean I don't love you. I will support you all the way through. But I said sometimes taking that class over will build character. I failed classes in undergrad too, but they didn't get me twice if they got me once. You learn from that experience, good or bad. And that's the kind of professor that I want to be. I want to be authentically myself each and every day so that they can see that there's a lot of different ways to be an engineer. And some of them are people centered and person centered, and it's about me helping you because that's really what engineers are here to do: improve society and help people. If you're just looking at the code, the math, and the science, and you're taking the people aspect out, you're doing something wrong.
Agreed, agreed. And I think it's wonderful how much support, first of all, that you give to your undergrads, but also the research experience, because
Yeah.
especially if they're able to get published, I mean, that's kind of the currency of
That's
academia,
actually
especially.
what we're trying to do now. So what I tell my students is who want to go to grad school, it'd be good to have a publication, but one of the challenges with undergraduates, because my school doesn't have PhD students, we have masters, but most of them do course based, is undergraduate students also are kind of like herding cats. It's really hard to keep their focus and attention because, if the fraternity parties pick up or, you know, jazz band practice or whatever, all of a sudden I go to my lab and I don't have any students anymore. So keeping them focused enough to be able to get a substantive product out that we can publish is the thing you have to do with them. It takes a little bit longer though. Another thing is retaining them. Right when I get a good one, they graduate, and I have to get another
Mhm.
one. A bigger thing, with grad students, you're going to have the continuity of that grad student all the way to they graduate. An undergraduate student will be excited about doing research with you fall quarter and then disappear winter quarter.
Mhm.
So,
Mhm.
but it's important. That would have been something I would have loved to have more of as an undergraduate as well. But giving them those experiences is important.
Definitely. So just switching tracks a little bit, I have a few questions that are a little random just to get to know you a little bit better. So one is, well, I hear that you are writing a book. So what inspired you to start writing fiction?
Okay. So this was there's a lot that happened during the pandemic of 2020. I think when we were all sitting at home all the time, your brain just starts exploding with all of these ideas. So I was talking to some of my colleagues. They're all Black women in engineering as well. And we always have talked about engineering has a marketing problem. And one of the reasons why we don't have enough diversity is engineering has a marketing problem. We should have a TV show, like Issa Rae, we should have a TV show. And so one of the things we had discussed is there's no way you could just jump straight into a TV show like Insecure, but we needed to start somewhere. Like maybe if we started with books, then a YouTube series, then a web series, then maybe it picked up for a television show, then maybe one day we'd have a movie like Hidden Figures or something. So it was me and Dr. Monica Cox, Dr. Tahira Reed Smith, and Dr. Tequila Harris. We're all at different universities. We had said we'll start with books. That's what we'll do. We'll start with books, and we're all going to write books about Black women in engineering who were professors. And so that's more than a notion. And all of us were technical writers. We did not realize how hard it was to write fictional books. So that fictional book series has actually never come out. We're still working on getting it out, but in the midst of doing that, some things we came up with, we met some people, most of them on Twitter actually, who are fictional writers and have become mentors and coaches and given us some advice about writing. And through that, we started writing probably more like smaller books to help get those started. So the first book I released was me doing that. And I've called them Black STEM romances. So just this morning, as a matter of fact, I am now finishing up the book that I started writing with my other colleagues. Those books are going to be called the Catalyst Chronicles. And all of us will have at least one book in that series. But then in the midst of me doing that, I started writing the Black STEM romance novels, which were shorter. And I've finished now the second of those, hopefully to come out later this summer. But it was really a matter of us doing something and then learning along the way. Writing a fictional book is not like writing a technical paper, and learning there's a different way you have to do that. But it really, the whole goal was for us to find a different way of marketing engineering to diverse populations. I was so excited to find that some people actually had taken my first book and were sharing it with their high school students, right? Because the research shows that even young women, young Black women included, who may have been interested in math and science, somewhere around fifth or sixth grade, we start to lose them. We start to lose them because of some negative interactions they either have with a teacher or students in their class, or kids saying girls can't be engineers. So if we could start writing some novels, having
Mhm.
some cartoons, comic books, whatever, so they see themselves, we can retain them all the way through. And then we also have another big melt sometime during the freshman year of college where these quote unquote weed out classes turns people away, the calculus, the physics, the chemistry courses. So we just have to find ways for people to continue to see mentors, role models, and themselves in this field, no matter whatever negative media or other things are coming towards them. So that was really the goal of the books, and now I've actually started to like it.
Oh, that's excellent. That's and
Yeah.
yeah, that is definitely a great way to market engineering because
Hmm.
it'll capture people's imaginations, and once you're able to capture the imagination, then people can start to
To
kind of
hold
fall.
on to it. Yes,
Well,
absolutely.
that's great. Thank you. So what is something that you wish others understood about what you do? So maybe something maybe that you haven't discussed yet, but that you hope others would understand about what you do.
That you don't have to be a super brainiac or super smart or super nerd to be an engineer. I hear that a lot, and people like to say that I'm super smart and a nerd. Well, yeah, I am a nerd, but I don't like that because I think by promoting that, it automatically prices some people out of the market before they ever even tried. And I like to say anything worth having is worth working for. So if it's
Mhm.
important and it's something you want to do, even if it doesn't come to you easy, let's figure out how to get you the resources you need in order to be successful. One thing we're starting to see, especially with this current generation of students, is some of them are just not comfortable asking for help.
Mhm.
Asking for help does not mean you're a failure. It does not mean you're not smart. It just means you are smart enough to identify the resources that are going to help you to achieve. Going to a tutor does not have a stigma on it, other than, hey, I don't know how to do this. Can you help me out? So I want to really normalize seeing people struggle, knowing it's okay, and getting the help you need if you can. But when you say things like only a brainiac or a super smart person can be an engineer or get a PhD or teach engineering, then there's a whole community of people that we're immediately losing who could be really great. I've had a student who really struggled in his classes, but this same student would go back to his dorm at night and he invent things I had never seen before in my life that I could never do. Like doorbells for the dorm room. So that was a person we would have lost out on because they didn't get an A in calculus. But he was one of the most creative students I had ever taught.
Mm. Yes, that's very definitely very true. So they say that the mark of intelligence is to know what you don't know. And I definitely think
Yes,
the PhD
absolutely.
process instructs you. Yeah. So I agree. People should not be
Hmm.
discouraged by what you don't know, but like you said, ask for help and just be kind
Yeah.
of what do you call it? Just gritty, I guess, just really
Yeah, yeah,
wanting
yeah.
to.
Yeah.
Mhm.
I like to say that
What
practice makes progress, if not perfection, and diligence is important. There was a word I heard somebody say recently. I can't remember. Resilient, and they were saying sometimes, especially in industries, they call Black women resilient, and somebody said I really have a issue with that because sometimes by saying Black people are resilient, you're basically saying I can keep this toxic culture going because they're resilient. But I'm not saying that kind of resilience, but I'm saying resilience in the fact of sometimes you are going to face some obstacles, but you're resilient enough to know how to overcome them, not to excuse a toxic culture that needs to be addressed and fixed. But if there are some things there that need to be changed, you work on that as well.
Mhm.
But in the meantime, I'm not going anywhere. I told somebody one time, I think if I had known how toxic STEM could be for Black women, I probably wouldn't have stayed. So thank God of my naivete and ignorance and not realizing how bad it was. Because once I was so far down the journey, I wasn't going to turn back.
Mhm.
Right.
Would you say that, I guess, discerning the different types of resilience that you just spoke of,
Hmm.
so that kind of the toxic environment is really very draining, whereas the resilience that you're speaking of that people should have kind of is more that flow state, the kind of even though it's tough, I am just kind of building the skills and getting better and better every time. So just so that people maybe have a
Absolutely.
feeling for, how to discern between those two
Yeah,
different types of
absolutely.
resilience.
So building your muscles, like I like to talk about as a professor, you it's not the customer is always right. I'm more like your physical trainer. So me telling you that you need to do 50 circuits problems in the next 3 weeks is because I'm trying to build your skills or build your circuits muscles, not because I'm trying to punish you. Things like that, that kind of resilience is what you need to do because I'm building your engineering muscles. The kind of resilience I'm talking about that is not appropriate is that if you're having a professor who's standing in front of the class making jokes about women in engineering, or if you go into a professor's office and they're saying things like, I've never seen a black engineer before, you sure you want to major in this? That's toxic. You don't have to be resilient to stuff like that. That stuff needs to be addressed and with a quickness. However, if having a difficult exam is part of the process, but I will say, I also have some posts about this on my Twitter. Having a difficult exam is part of the process. Having exams that nobody can pass, where the average is a 40 and the professor has to curve to get a 40 to a C, is ridiculous. That's not teaching. I talk about that as well. That I experienced that at Georgia Tech. If every exam you're taking, everybody fails, and nobody wants to help anybody else because they don't want you to blow the curve because your 35 might become the C, so I can't help you. That's ridiculous, and that means no one is learning. I give
Yes.
exams people can pass, but my students like to say I'm not easy. I think I'm fair, but I'm not easy, but I'm also not ridiculous, right? So my exam averages are 75 to 80, right? My exam average is not a 40. The other problem that does is that if everybody got an F and then you have to curve to get somebody to pass, how do people even know what they were supposed to know and what they weren't supposed to know? How do I know
Mm.
if I learned anything at all? Right?
Yeah.
If I can't measure my success, that's a problem.
Mhm.
So that's what I
Yes.
mean about resilience, right?
Yes. I had a class where the curve was was like what you described, and it was in the syllabus. So it was known that half
Yeah,
the
that's
class was
crazy.
going
So
to
they
definitely
planned
fail.
for that. If I give a
Yes.
test that's harder than I anticipated, I will do that. But harder for me is if the average is not a C. Like harder for me would be the average was a D instead of a C. If I'm giving a test where everybody failed, then that means I did not teach that well, right?
Yeah. So I guess I have a few kind of questions as we begin to wrap up that hopefully will be very interesting. So this question I like to ask, it was inspired by the podcast, The Diary of a CEO. And the question is, what question would you like us to ask the next person that we interview?
Can you tell me a little bit about what other type of people you interview? See, me as a professor, I got to know some data before I can answer that. Like, I know I'm an engineer. Are most of your guests in STEM fields? Are they anything or
So most will be in STEM fields.
okay?
So we focus on STEAM. So we hope to also have some folks in art as well. But
Okay. What kind of question keeps you up at night?
mm, that's a good question. What kind of question keeps you up at night? Yeah, definitely a good question. Who else would you recommend that we speak to?
I would recommend a lot of people who are in the Black and X community. Probably some of the more active people. Chanel Tolson is I think her handle may be like G protein or something like that. But there's a lot of people in the Black and X community who are very active on TikTok, Instagram, and Twitter who would be really good. There's Professor Corey, Kelly. Kelly, I think, is in neuroscience, but they're really active on social media and understanding why that's important to show people in our field in new ways, new and different ways. I think is really important.
Thank you. We'll definitely be
Yeah.
looking out and reaching out. Thank you so much. So you are currently writing fictional books. It seems like more towards an adult audience, but if you could write a book about STEM, maybe for children, about
Mhm.
a well-known person, who would it be about?
So I actually just did a Black History Month post this weekend on Dr. Ayanna Howard. Obviously, I'm going to skew towards people in robotics. So there's not a lot of Black women in robotics. So I would write books about more Black women in robotics. Dr. Ayanna Howard is probably the most well-known one, but there are others, just like Dr. Monica Anderson is also a Black woman in robotics. There's Jasmine Lawrence. There is Muyinatu Bell, I believe. So I would write more books about Black women in robotics so that kids could see them. I also have a children's book that I've written. I'm trying to get that one published right now, and it's more of the preschool kindergarten level age, and
Mhm.
that's about kids and their robots, so showing children interacting with robots and how they can use them to do things on the playground, or stuff like that. So but getting into a little of the older genre, it would just be
Mhm.
profiles, kind of like how they did of Katherine Johnson and NASA, but what other women look like who do robotics, or other Black women engineers, so that they can see themselves. What were they doing as little girls that you probably also do?
Oh, that's great. So can you tell our audience a little bit more about STEMiness and also where they can find you, connect with
Yeah.
you, etc.?
So the name of my company is Noir Steminist. This is actually Steminist. I got this from a company. Oh, what is her name? I don't know. It'll come to me in a minute. But anyway, I believe I got it from the STEM Noir website, but I get some of the Steminist gear from the STEM Noir website. And then I get some of the other from, I think it's Nerdy STEM Gear is another website where I get some of these shirts. So this one may have come from there. But Noir Stemness is NOIRESTEMINIST. And where that came from is when I started doing my robotics for the streets and my STEM for the streets work, I was trying to find a way to describe the fact that I'm a woman who's promoting STEM to increase diversity, and in particular, focusing on more getting more Black and brown people into STEM. And so Noir STEMinist just was a natural conglomerate of all of that together. And it was also a really good way for me to find my stuff on social media. Because after I started posting things for a while, and I sometimes want to go and find an old post to share with somebody, I could never find it. So by giving it a word that did not really exist, if I did a search, I know it would pull my stuff up. So that was another reason why I came up with that. But the things that I'm most excited about is I have also just recently launched my open source robot kit. I've had people asking me for a while for a robot kit. So I now have one that you can 3D print. So as long as you can get access to a 3D printer, and you can buy some things online, you can print and build your own robot. Or if you absolutely cannot do that, you can also buy an assembled robot on my website. So that's one of the things I'm really excited about. And as you've already mentioned, my second Black STEM romance is hopefully going to come out at the end of July. But the first one came out July of last year. My birthday's in July. So I guess every year at my birthday, I got to publish a book. I think that's the new thing that has to happen. So the first book was Elevated Inferno, Monet's Moment. And it was about a young lady who's getting a graduate degree in computer science and robotics, where she wants to design interactive robots to engage with autistic children in order to help them with their socialization skills as well as learning some things. And she's on her way to her dream job interview at a robotics company when the elevator breaks down. A lot of my stories are based upon something I either see on social media or something I've experienced. So I've been in an elevator that broke down.
Oh.
And there was something on Instagram a couple of years ago about a young lady who was stuck in an elevator, and the firefighter who rescued her, she live streamed it because he was gorgeous. And everyone thought it was going to start a love connection until he had to come on social media and say he was married with children.
Oh
So
no.
that's so that's where that story came from. There is a character in that book. His name is Moses, and he is Reese's best friend, and he is a Lothario. And so, although he's encouraging Reese and Monet to get together, he's kind of like not a one woman man. So, book two is actually about him. There is someone who is able to get him to hang up his whatevers and become a one woman man. So the book coming out in July is called Breaking Point. every book is going to have a Black woman in STEM, somehow related. So Chandler is the female character in book 2, and she's a nurse. And Moses is going to meet her as she's exercising, walking in the park, trying to spit game. And that's going to be the beginning of their love journey. And actually, the next 2 books are also going to be related. They're all going to have the same universe of characters.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you for
Thank
sharing
you.
just so honestly, authentically. Thank you for sharing your love and your passion for engineering, for robotics, as well as for people, especially
Yes,
students
absolutely.
and students of color. And thank you for, making the environment of engineering more inclusive, so we don't lose those young men, like you said, that are creative in their dorm at night, but just couldn't pass their calculus class for some reason. So,
Absolutely.
uh, yeah, and thank you for just kind of putting more information and knowledge out there into the world so that more young people will become interested in engineering and in robotics. So thank you for making
Thank
time to
you.
talk with us today.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you for joining us on Origins with myself, Dr. Natasha Wilson. We hope that you will join us again. You can find us at www.originsconvo.com, as well as on Twitter and Instagram using the handle at OriginsConvo. Please join our Substack or at originsconvo.substack.com, where we will post interviews and other interesting content for both free and paid subscribers.